wonderful. Dear God, once again, open our hearts as we open this season of Lent with the story that always opens the season of Lent, the temptation. Amen. So 2 weeks ago, the subject of hell came up in the gospel lesson appointed for the day, and this week it's the devil. And I'm no more a believer in a literal devil than I am in a literal hell. But let's look at this text in its first century Mediterranean context. The world that Jesus lived in had no trouble at all with the idea of spirits who trouble good souls like Jesus. Today, Eastern European Jews, Sicilians like my mother's family, Roma, the list goes on, all know and believe in that kind of thing. When I left Ashland years ago, the local rabbi, a very dear friend of mine, gave me an amulet to protect me from the evil eye. I carry it everywhere. I still do. Some Mediterranean people wear blue for protection, or they paint the borders of their windows and door jambs blue to keep the evil spirits away. Well, the people in Jesus' day saw good and evil in this kind of animistic way. Now, just before Jesus is tempted, there is a story of his baptism, remember? And remember how a voice comes there from heaven saying, "This is my beloved Son with whom I am well pleased." Well, Matthew's first century readers would have their ears perk up hearing those words from God. They would know what would necessarily come next. They would know that all the spirits around would hear those divine words, that divine compliment, and they would be put on notice in that moment. They'd be alerted that Jesus was ripe for temptation. And so we have the devil showing up where he can be best understood and where he can get the best traction in a waterless, uninhabitable section of Palestine. And we have these three stories about turning stones to bread, jumping from a temple mount. What is all this stuff about? Well, here's my explanation. Do you remember? I'm trying to go another level here. Remember the popular movie from 1987, Broadcast News? Now, central in this movie is a dilemma. Should television news organizations report the news fairly, or should they market the personalities of their broadcasters who will say anything at all for ratings? Well, there you are. Way back in 1987, they were looking ahead to Tucker Carlson, who peddles conspiracy theories every day on Fox News and then debunks them in private. The film's narrative involves a love triangle. Tom, played by William Hurt, is this handsome, anchor broadcaster who lacks most of the skills of a reporter. He has very few scruples when it comes to the ethics of reporting. He brazenly inserts himself and his personality into news stories. Despite his shallowness and lack of brain power, his career ascends rapidly. Now, Aaron, played by Albert Brooks, is a brilliant reporter, passionate about his vocation. He has the highest standards, and he is crazy for Jane, a producer of the news. Well, Jane, played by Holly Hunter, shares Aaron's cherished ideals, but she is torn between Aaron and the very handsome, charming Tom. So at one point, Aaron senses that Jane has actually fallen in love with Tom. And very wrong-headed when it comes to love, Aaron confronts her about this, asking Jane how she could possibly be in love with a twit like Tom. And he says something so self-serving. He says, Tom, while a very nice man, is the devil. And Jane says, Aaron is just jealous. But Aaron's just warming up. He says this, listen, he says, what do you think the devil is going to look like if he's around? Nobody is going to be taken in if he has a long, red, pointy tail. No, I'm semi-serious here. He will look attractive, and he will be nice and helpful, and he will get a job where he influences a great God-fearing nation, and he will never do an evil thing. He will just bit by bit lower standards where they are important. He will just coax along flash over substance just a tiny bit, and he will talk about all of us really being salesmen, and he'll get all the great women. Well, the scene illustrates the mechanism of temptation, I think. The temptations occur over time, slowly and gradually. They work on us. True to life, the gospel stories of the temptations of Jesus just show how these things happen. The devil here is working on Jesus patiently, little by little, trying to get him to dumb down his mission. Get him to appeal to the lowest instincts in people. He is saying, sure, Jesus, you can heal people of their infirmities, but put a little glitz into it, a little Hollywood, and they'll follow you to the end of the earth. Well, Adolf Hitler did not begin his terrors by rounding up Jews the first day that he was in office in Berlin. No, he first did things to test the waters. He took small, measured actions. And then 5 whole years later, there was Kristallnacht, a night of terror when German Jews were beaten in the streets and had their businesses trashed. And once the Nazi high command saw that the German populace had become inured to violence against Jews, they moved then on to genocide. Well, the things the devil offered to do for Jesus, they don't seem so awful when you think about it. I mean, turning a rock into a piece of bread when, you're hungry? What's so terribly wrong about that? We're only human. We all need to eat. If you could make bread out of rocks, why not do it? But Jesus would not turn stones to bread, because though he knew that people need bread to eat, people live by more than bread alone. So no, to be really alive and vibrant, people need more than that even. They need purpose and meaning and inspiration. They need something to be passionate about, something worth giving their lives for. And the second temptation comes. It's the temptation to jump off a building. Well, to what purpose? To prove to those who might doubt it that Jesus was someone special. Why not do that? Haven't Christians through the centuries been saddled with the task of convincing a doubting world that Jesus was special? Why couldn't he have made the job a little easier with, a few acrobatics off the temple? Well, Jesus refused to do that because he refused to water down his cosmic calling. He would not turn being the Son of God into some ridiculous circus act in order to please a few extra followers who might want him to be kind of like a walking Cirque du Soleil. Finally, the devil showed Jesus the kingdoms of the world in a vision and said that if he liked, he could see to it that the kingdoms were given to Jesus under his authority. Well, we have to wonder why he didn't at least choose to do that. What could have been better for the world than if Jesus had taken the reins of world government right then and there? Not such a very awful thing for the devil to offer him. Many evangelicals would like nothing more than to trade the U.S. Constitution for an authoritarian Christian monarchy. They say so absolutely clearly and often. Even members of Congress, even noted women members of Congress have said this on television. Well, allegiance gotten from people without their free will is no allegiance worth having. In short, the devil tempted Jesus with the most insidious of temptations, the temptation to do what on the surface appears to be attractive and good, But to go after what on the surface looks good means that Jesus would have to bypass the excellent, and he would not choose to do that. You know, the most difficult choices in our lives are not between good and evil. They are those choices between the good and the best. And that's what this story is about. Again, why not feed the whole world? Well, 40 years ago, somebody in our federal government got the bright idea of substituting gifts of corn to the struggling nation of Colombia instead of cash. It seemed on the surface to be a great idea. Loads of corn our government bought at the time to keep the corn prices high was just sitting in silos. The trouble was that flooding Colombia with corn hurt their farmers, drove them out of the corn business. One of them, named Jorge, was interviewed by an American missionary a year after corn prices hit bottom. "Are you getting by?" he was asked. "Yes," said Jorge, "we're getting by." "Well, how are you managing?" "Well, we still grow our own vegetables and we have a few animals, but our cash crop now is cocaine." The good versus the best. Sometimes it takes a while to see it. It's like having your eyes adjust to the dark. But once you get there, you can see a lot. And it's important on many levels of the living of a life, this thing Jesus is doing for us at the outset of his ministry. Something you need to make the choice. Sometimes we all need to make the choice between the good and the best in a way that keeps us true to the creed that we have attached ourselves to or feel born into. Barbara Brown Taylor, a favorite preacher of mine, spoke once on the subject of Sabbath. I was in the room. This was at Trinity Episcopal downtown here. And she told us of a man named David, who she went to high school with back in Georgia. David was the best basketball player ever to come out of her high school. Every year he was the team highest scorer. He was always all-state. And when he graduated, they retired his jersey and his number. Well, this happens all the time. What was remarkable about David was that each of the 4 years he played, he only played half the games. That was because games were played on Tuesday and Friday nights, right? Remember that in high school? David was Jewish, and he observed the Sabbath. So he played his heart out on Tuesday nights, and then on Friday evenings, he put on his kippah and he stayed home. And after the Friday game, his teammates would all come over and tell him what happened. He loved basketball, was crazy about basketball, but he loved being a Jew on Friday nights more than he loved playing basketball the other 6 days. He knew exactly who he was. What David had to give, he could only give 1 game out of 2. But who would ever say it wasn't enough? Fact was, it was more than any other kid in the high school gave. And that wasn't because of his talent, it was because of his character. So, sometimes the good versus the best has to do with a code that no one else can identify with, maybe, but it's ours. And we decide that the best is still something we have to do, if only to please ourselves. The good versus the best is a difficult business. It is easier, to go along with whatever people like the most. But Jesus always faced the harder task, and we have his model as a challenge. We can live a good life, and no one will think the worst of us, but sometimes there's a voice within us that says something that beckons us off the conventional grid. You can do what you do right here, like Bea Luxinger did from her retirement home. Or maybe there'll be an opportunity elsewhere that, ups the ante for you, that promises fulfillment you've never known. It takes kind of looking deep into your own heart and weighing so very much to see what is truly, a cut above, what is truly the best. The Apostle Paul put the challenge this way once a long time ago when he said, and I'll close with his words, "This is my prayer, that your love may overflow more and more with knowledge and full insight to help you determine what is best, so that in the day of Christ you may be pure and supreme and blameless." Amen. Let us stand.